Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Nothing Notable podcast. Jack Hubert today, joined by Daniel Elmore. We had a great conversation previewing the upcoming NFL season. I, for one, am certainly very excited. A lot of fun storylines here. Who's going to win it all? You got to give it a listen to find out. All right. Thank you.
2020 NFL Preview Show. This is one of the most exciting times of the year because nothing bad has happened yet.
There's only hope.
There's only limitless potential. And that's the thing that's most exciting about doing sort of prediction videos about anything, really, is that anything could happen. And so we could just let our minds wander and go crazy. And so today we're going to go through each division and talk about some of the key storylines. Some teams are not particularly interesting or worth talking about, so we're not going to talk about them that much. But for the most part, we'll hit every team at least a little bit. But before we jump into that, I just have a couple of rapid-fire questions to get us warmed up. First question, I got 3 over-unders for you.
Okay, fun stuff.
It's 3 quarterbacks, 3 of the best quarterbacks in the league. They're touchdowns and passing yards. Real simple. All right, Tom Brady, over-under 29.5 touchdowns.
Ooh. I'm going to take the over there. Mainly because, do you want to explain my reasoning?
Yeah.
Okay. Mainly because I think that division does not have a lot of great defenses, but does have a lot of pretty quality offenses. So I think they're going to be in a lot of high-scoring shootout type of games.
Mm-hmm. And how about passing yards? 4,225.5 over-under.
Ooh. I'm going to take the over again for Tom Brady.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. All right, Pat Mahomes, over-under 36.5 touchdowns.
Ooh. That sounds like about the right number there.
Right, yeah, that's a tough one.
I'm going to take the slight under.
Okay. Slight under for Pat Mahomes, and for passing yards, he is at 4,699.5 over-under.
I'm going to take the over on the passing yards.
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds about right again, but I think he's, a little bit over that.
Mm-hmm. And then lastly, last year's MVP, Lamar Jackson, over-under 26.5 passing touchdowns.
Over, under. Well, Lamar had 36 last year, I think, without throwing the ball much. Granted, he had an insane ratio of touchdowns to pass attempts. I'm going to take over.
Yeah, for me, that's one of the easier ones. Over under 3,199 yards passing.
I'm going to take the over on that too.
Yeah. Over under 999.5 rushing yards.
I'm going to take the slight under on that one. I think there's a little bit of regression coming in that regards. But yeah, I'm going to take the slight under there.
Okay, great. Now, next question. Of these teams that I'm going to list, who is most likely to get the number 1 overall pick? The Washington football team, the Jags, the Bengals again, the Lions, the Panthers.
The Jags to me seem like they're trying to lose.
Yeah.
Interesting to me that you didn't have the New York football Giants on that list because
Right.
I think they might be very bad this year.
There is great potential for them to be bad, but also it depends on Daniel Jones, who a lot of people got really excited about towards the end of the year for
some reason.
So it all kind of is going to fall down on Daniel Jones, and we'll get to that when we talk about what makes a good season for the Giants.
Of those teams, I don't think it's the Lions because I think they have the most high-quality quarterback play of all those teams. I don't think it's the Washington football team because I think their defense is actually quite solid. I like the Bengals offense, but I think in this year specifically, continuity is kind of going to be key. When you got a new quarterback, a rookie quarterback, it's going to be tough. I'm going with the Jags. I think the Jags are trying to lose football games here.
I'm going with the Jags as well, and we'll talk about them. But one of the other teams, the Washington football team, that leads me to my next question. Will the Washington football team have a name by the end of the season?
No. No.
And next, who do you think is going to be the most disappointing team? I have a couple of teams that could potentially make that list. The Ravens could potentially be a most disappointing team, depending on if Lamar Jackson gets figured out. And by most disappointing, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going 6-10, but just, not MVP level. The Texans, the Bucks, the Vikings.
Of those teams, or can I throw a fifth one?
You can throw any, yeah.
I'm going to say the Browns.
Most disappointing. That's interesting because I don't expect that much from them. See, these teams that I listed, I expected a lot
the
from.
The Browns, maybe it's more of a media thing. The media is hyping up the Browns again. Like, oh, look at all these weapons that they have, even though they're the exact same team they were last year.
Yeah.
The Browns are going 6-10 again.
Yeah.
Like, they're going to be bad.
Last year was one of the worst and most egregious media portrayals, I think, of any team ever with the Browns, because last year they really were going full tilt, like this is going to be a championship contending team, and it was clear that it was never going to happen.
I have a lot of thoughts on the Browns for later, but I will save them for that.
Next question. Who is most likely to have a return to form season between Todd Gurley and Le'Veon Bell?
Well, for Todd Gurley, Dirk Cutter, the Falcons' offensive coordinator, has never had a good rushing team in his life. At the same time, Adam Gase is a horrible head coach, and the Jets have a horrible offensive line. I'm going to go with Todd Gurley, although my hopes are not very high for either of them this year.
You mentioned Adam Gase. Coaches who are most likely to lose their job at the end of the season. Here are some candidates. Adam Gase, Dan Quinn, maybe Mike Zimmer, maybe Matt Patricia, maybe Doug Marrone. Huh?
Doug Marrone's definitely gone.
Yeah.
Because he probably should have been gone last year. Matt Patricia's going to be gone. Adam Gase is going to be gone. Mike Zimmer is one that I think is sneaky.
Yeah, that's... Yeah.
Because I really think the Vikings probably finish around 8-8 this year. Mm-hmm. Plus or minus one win on that. And I think if they do, it's very likely he will be out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're a team that I could see going 6-10 or 13-3.
Yeah.
They're one of those kind of teams. Last couple of questions. Are the Bucks the Eagles' dream team? Do you remember the Eagles' dream team?
Yes, I do remember the Eagles' dream team.
There's some sort of dream team. Do they run the risk of becoming the Eagles' dream team?
I don't think so, because the person who's calling them the dream team is not their backup quarterback who's washed. It's not their washed backup quarterback.
Sure.
I think the Bucks are a legitimately good team. The Bucks went 7-9 last year with their quarterback throwing 30 goddamn interceptions.
Impressive.
You telling me Tom Brady can't add 2 wins onto that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Last 2 questions. Are the Rams going to be the most expensive and most talented bad team this year?
Yeah. The Rams are going 8-8.
Yeah.
That division's super tough.
Yeah. Best division in football.
Best division in football. They very likely could only win 2 division games this year.
Last question. Do fans appear at this year's Super Bowl?
Oh, man. I wish I knew where the Super Bowl was held off the top of my head, because I think that is going to play.
It's in Florida.
It's in Florida. Oh, well, if it's in Florida, then fuck yeah.
It was in
Miami last year.
It's in Tampa this year.
Oh, that's right. It is in Tampa. Yeah, I think there are going to be at least some capacity of fans.
Mm-hmm. All right. Those are all my rapid-fire questions. Now we can get into division by division. What are the most interesting storylines of the year? I guess we're going to start in the AFC West.
AFC West.
And the first storyline that we highlighted was, as we wrote it down, what is Derek Carr? And also, are the Raiders moving forward or backward?
This is like a team, again, this is one of those teams where if they went 11-5, I would not be shocked. But if they went like 5-11, I would not be shocked either.
Yeah, they're a classic grit football team where they could just grit out 11 wins, but those kind of teams are also not necessarily the most talented, and they could just by the same token lose 11 games. So yeah, no, I'd see them. Ultimately, I don't see them improving much beyond what they did last year. I don't have high expectations for them. I think in regards to what is Derek Carr, I mean, I think we know what he is. I think he's not necessarily peak Alex Smith, like what we wanted Alex Smith to be, but he's like realistically what Alex Smith could have peak been, if that makes sense. Like, he's not a great deep thrower. He's pretty much short and medium accuracy kind of guy. He doesn't blow anybody away with any particular thing.
Do you remember when Derek Carr was an MVP candidate in 2016?
I do.
When he had an absolutely fantastic year.
I do.
I think we're still kind of waiting to see that Derek Carr again. And really, I just think in order to do that, he needs to throw the ball down the field.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a Derek Carr thing where he's playing it conservative or if that's like a schematic thing. But I like the weapons that they have on their offense this year. Henry Ruggs, Bryan Edwards, 2 very good rookies that they got on the draft this year. Hunter Renfrow is a solid slot receiver. And then you have some talented but so far disappointing in their career guys with Zay Jones and Nelson Aguilar rounding out that receiving core. Add in Darren Waller at tight end, Josh Jacobs at running back. They have all the weapons to help Derek Carr have a good season. My biggest fear is that if Derek Carr doesn't start off great through 4 games, that John Gruden pulls the plug on him and puts in Marcus Mariota.
Yeah.
Because I don't think John Gruden is all that high on Derek Carr.
No, and I think that's really the thing is there's a couple of quarterbacks in the NFL that we'll talk about who are on teams that they're in a position where they have this decent quarterback who could get better, but they're not in love with them. So at that point, I just don't know why you don't make a trade or something, because like Derek Carr is not John Gruden's guy. It's just that simple. And so the longer that you hold on to Derek Carr, I think the longer you're holding yourself back from whatever team you want to become.
John Gruden has been a big fan of Nathan Peterman for the last 3 years, which does bring in some questions about his judgment. Do you think the Raiders would be better with Marcus Mariota starting?
No. I don't. I mean, he offers you more athleticism, but ultimately, well, let me just look at Derek Carr's stats last year, because he had a pretty decent stat line. It wasn't explosive, but it was decent. He had a 70% completion percentage. Real good.
Really good.
Real good. 21-8. So around 4,000 yards. So he's efficient. He's completing passes. I'm not sure what the issue is there.
They use him as a game manager, which I think is a dirty word that gets thrown around a lot to disparage NFL quarterbacks. But I do not think it's a bad thing necessarily.
No.
Alex Smith was a very good manager for 2 different teams. Some would say Jimmy Garoppolo is a game manager. You can win games with a game manager.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think I want them to take the reins off Derek Carr a little bit, because the dude's got a strong arm.
Yeah.
I want to see him use that. I want to see him throw in some deep passes to Henry Ruggs. Yeah, I just want them to let him play to his full potential, because I think he's a very talented quarterback.
I want them to believe in him.
Yeah.
Because it just seems year after year, the question is Derek Carr the guy? Is Derek Carr the guy? Is John Gruden sold on Derek Carr? And it just feels like they're always 1 foot out the door waiting for a better quarterback opportunity. I think they signed Mariota because they thought maybe that could be a high potential upside guy that could just step in mid-season and take over for Derek Carr. Because again, I don't think John Gruden is sold on Derek Carr. I just don't think I don't think he's John Gruden's guy.
No.
I think it's just that simple. And like I said, if you're still playing with a guy that you don't believe in, then you're going to be stuck at 8-8 for a while. So, any other thoughts on the Raiders before we move on?
I will say I really like the past few drafts that Mike Mayock has done, which is surprising. I think they've gotten good players, maybe not necessarily at the spots in the draft that I thought these players would go, but players who nonetheless I think were quality players. And I think that is a draft philosophy to go with, that if you have a dude who you think is very good, if he's the best guy on your board, even if you think you could get him around later, take him now. Just get the guy that you want.
Yeah, it's all about scheme. Real quick, I just want to briefly mention a couple of teams in the AFC West. Broncos, do you think Drew Lock is going to be their guy? Do you think that they improve from 7-9?
I'm a fan of Drew Lock. I liked him a decent bit out of Missouri when he was coming into the draft. I like the weapons that they have around him. Will they improve? I don't know. I thought the signing of Melvin Gordon was puzzling to me. They do get Bradley Chubb back on defense, which I think is an underrated addition that no one's talking about because that gives them 2 elite edge rushers. I think I had them going 7-9 again, but if they went 9-7 and snuck into the playoffs, I wouldn't be totally shocked.
Yeah, for me, they're safe. It's safe to assume 7 wins, and then I give them the +2 margin as well. But I don't give them the -2 margin.
Yeah.
I don't think they go below 7 wins necessarily, unless they have some wild injuries. Chargers. How long do they start Tyrod Taylor?
Man.
First, let's just talk about our thoughts on Tyrod Taylor.
I think that I will speak for myself, am a lot higher on Tyrod Taylor than literally everybody else in the NFL.
And I really like Tyrod Taylor. I'm not quite as high as you, but I really like Tyrod Taylor.
I think you can win games with Tyrod Taylor. I do not think he's a bad quarterback. Does he have the strongest arm in the world? No. Is he as aggressive as you would like him to be? No, not necessarily, but I think he's a lot like Derek Carr in that regards, where if you put the correct scheme around him, you can win games. The things he was doing with those god-awful Buffalo offenses was fairly impressive.
Yeah, and he's always been in a situation, even going back to Buffalo, where he was never going to be the guy, and even now going to Los Angeles, he's set up to fail again.
Yeah.
When he went to Cleveland, he was set up to fail. Like, Baker was going to come in and become the starting quarterback. And now he goes to Los Angeles, and they draft a guy in the first round.
Who, by the way, I got to go on a quick tangent about Justin Herbert. I think Justin Herbert is not very good. I had him ranked as maybe the 50th player on my draft board this year. There were some very concerning things that I saw on the game tape. He's one of the players that the NFL scouts always fall in love with because he's 6'4", white, has a big arm, fairly mobile.
Trunky like Luck. Coastal like Luck.
Coastal kid. He's like what they look like, but he doesn't. I go a lot of the times by the eye test, which is sometimes a flawed way to go about things. But if you watch a guy and you just don't feel it in your gut sometimes, a lot of times it's not there. Conversely, with Lamar Jackson, I remember texting you in the fall of 2016, before Lamar was even eligible for the draft. I'm like, I want the Niners to draft this guy in 2 years. And I was goddamn right about that one.
Yeah, you were big right on Lamar. I have a test similar to the eye test. It's don't draft Oregon quarterbacks test. Especially not in the first round. That's kind of my general rule of thumb.
That's a good test there. Marcus Mariota.
Yeah.
Joey Harrington.
Yeah. Immediately you see the top 2, and then you have to really dig.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think Tyrod, if I just had to put a random number on it, 6 games.
6 games. That's probably what they'll do. I don't think that's what they should do. I also think that team is, after Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, who once again is hurt because the Chargers somehow always get hurt every single year.
Yeah.
They're kind of slim on receiving talent. I like Joe Reed for a 5th-round rookie, but he's also a rookie you picked in the 5th round. The Chargers will probably go 6-10 or 7-9, but probably have 13 games that they could have won. They'll miss 2 unblocked field goals. They'll have another one where they fumble at the goal line. They'll have a delay of game penalty on one. I don't know what snake bit that organization, but they have been cursed for a while, it seems like. And
we both like Anthony Lynn a lot.
I love Anthony Lynn. Yeah. I think Anthony Lynn is a very good head coach.
Yeah, as do I. And so it's a team that I'm rooting for.
Every year.
And unfortunately, not quite delivering. And I think, going 6 games to Tyrod and then benching him is not going to help that cause at all.
Derwin James is already hurt. They just always get injuries every single year.
Yeah, there's always a little brother complex too when you're playing in the same city as another team. Like the Clippers have had that little brother complex for a long time with the Lakers in the same building, and then now the 2 Los Angeles teams. It's also just perplexing that they came to Los Angeles to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, at least having no fans in the stands won't be anything new for them.
That's good. Real quick thoughts on Chiefs. Better or worse? Because, they're, there's not much else to say about the Chiefs. They're going to be good. I think Pat Mahomes is going to have a better year than he did last year.
I love Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah.
That was my favorite running back in the draft. I remember texting you before the draft and saying the NFL is screwed if he ends up on the Chiefs somehow. And what do you know? He ended up on the Chiefs.
Yeah.
I think you look at what Kareem Hunt did his rookie year there, where he had, I think it was like 1,500 total yards and like 8 touchdowns. And I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to easily do better than that.
Yeah, it was a scary moment in the NFL draft. It's a guy that fits perfectly. And as soon as he's on, you see him on the board and you see the Chiefs picking, and you're like, oh boy, this is
bad.
And then it cuts to Andy Reid in his Hawaiian shirt, and he's all happy.
Oh yeah, Andy Reid said he's the best running back he's seen since Brian Westbrook,
which I loved. Westbrook,
great guy. I think we are recording this on the Monday of Week 1. I think on that Thursday game, he will probably have over 200 total yards and 2 touchdowns. And I'm drafting him in every fantasy league this year.
Yeah, he's going really high in fantasy league.
I think his ADP right now is about 7th overall. I did have a league where I drafted him 2nd overall. Wow. Might be a mistake, but we're swinging for the fences.
Absolutely.
I thought his upside was higher than Saquon, and I don't like Ezekiel Elliott, so I wasn't picking him.
Yeah. So that's the AFC West. Any last thoughts on the AFC West before we move on?
It's an interesting division. I think the Chiefs are very clearly the best team in that division, but I think if things go right for the other 3 teams there, that they all have a pretty solid chance of making the playoffs, which is not necessarily something you can say for a lot of these other divisions.
Yeah, and it's a division that I just like.
Yeah,
I like every team in this division. I mean, the Raiders, I don't necessarily like them, but I enjoy watching them.
And now that they're not in the Bay, my disdain for them is less.
And that's something that I'm going to have to keep correcting myself with, because now they're the Las Vegas Raiders, which just feels silly.
They might be back. You never know.
They probably will be. They'll go to Los Angeles, and then they'll come back to Oakland again. So that's the AFC West. Let's move on to the AFC East. The big storyline involves the quarterbacks of this division.
Yeah.
First, Josh Allen. Can he take the next step? Does he become what everyone started anointing him as at the end of the year? Because everyone got pretty high on Josh Allen.
Man. Josh Allen is one of the most difficult quarterback evaluations out there, because he's super talented, except for the fact that he cannot hit a flat route. Mm-hmm. The accuracy on this dude is not good.
Yeah.
They have pieces around him. They added Stephon Diggs, who is a top 15 or so wide receiver in the league. They have John Brown. I love Zach Moss out of Utah, the running back. I think Josh Allen's going to be about the same as he was last year. I just don't know, man. I don't know.
Josh Allen, he's a weird quarterback, because he's kind of like if you take a mediocre Cam Newton game and a mediocre Ben Roethlisberger game, and you combine those two, and you end up with this guy. Low completion percentage, but high explosivity potential. And I'm more in the Josh Allen camp than I'm not. But that was more so the eye test for me. I saw bad stuff, but I also saw really, really exciting stuff, really high potential stuff. But then when you also just look at his stats, as I pull this up real quick, they're kind of alarmingly underwhelming. 2018, he played 12 games. And in those 12 games, he had 10 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. So, I mean, it's 10 games, in a rookie. So
rookie year.
That's pretty common that you have around an even split there. 2019, he played in 16 games, and they went 10-6. They won games. They were a good team.
They have an excellent defense over there.
Yes.
Sean McDermott has done a fantastic job with that team.
Mm-hmm. And then, actually, now that I'm thinking about this, I have a mock trade. But first, in 16 games, he had just over 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions at a 58% completion percentage. When I look at those numbers, I don't see a superstar quarterback in the making. So I'm in a similar position where when I watch him, I'm like, I think that there is high potential here, but then I look at these numbers and what actually is happening, the realness is a little underwhelming. So I do think he takes a step forward, I don't know what that step forward is, because for some quarterbacks, a step forward is throwing fewer interceptions or throwing more touchdowns or having a higher completion percentage. I think he takes one big step forward in one of those categories, but probably a big step backward in another. I think he probably throws more touchdowns and more interceptions in all likelihood, and then stays around 60% completion percentage, not that many yards.
I have questions about what his football IQ is sometimes, because first of all, the dude will just take hits out of, like, Lamar does a very good job of running, and even if he doesn't slide, not taking big hits. Josh Allen gets hammered every time he runs, and he's a pretty effective runner, especially down near the goal line, because he is such a big guy. And then you also see plays like in that Texans playoff games where he's just at midfield and he just laterals the ball with like a minute and a half left for no reason.
So far, his defining play.
That game really summed up everything about Josh Allen, because the first half he looked really excellent in that game, actually, and you're like, okay, maybe this is some guy you could build around. And then the second half he played like doo-doo.
Yeah. Now, here's a quick mock trade, something that I just made up. It doesn't necessarily make any sense, but let's pretend that this is a world where this is possible. The Buffalo Bills were 10-6 with that quarterback play. Mm-hmm. Let's say that in the offseason, Josh Allen called up the GM and he's like, I don't want to be in Buffalo.
Bold move for Josh Allen.
Yeah, I don't want to be in Buffalo. Like, let's make a trade happen. And they say, okay, well, we didn't think you were the guy anyway, so whatever. And then they decide to trade Josh Allen. They went 10-6 with that quarterback play. What about a Josh Allen and Derek Carr swap?
Interesting. I think John Gruden would be all over that.
I think so, too. I think Derek Carr, as a game manager, like we mentioned, would make that team a 12-13 win team.
Yeah, I think they are probably better. I don't know if the Raiders are necessarily better, but I think John Gruden buys into it a lot more. I like that trade. That's a fun one there.
I think it's one of those impossible trades because Derek Carr has less value than Josh Allen does technically. But I do think Derek Carr in Buffalo would win more games and have better numbers and probably better playoff success than Josh Allen at this current time. And I think Josh Allen would be an exciting player for John Gruden. So I think that could be a fun made up trade.
Yeah.
But it is still too early to trade a guy like Josh Allen, obviously, especially when I was just saying I think he has some upside and potential.
That whole first-round quarterback class from that year is highly interesting to me because they're all going to be in year 3 now, which means they're starting to come up on contract extensions pretty soon. So far, I think Lamar is probably the only one that's shown that, okay, I want to invest in this guy for another 5 years after these. What do you do with Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Josh Allen? Josh Rosen has had maybe some of the worst luck to start a career, and he looks like he's on the outside of the league looking in at this point. But I'm very fascinated to see in the next year or two what teams start to do with those guys.
Yeah. Now, you just mentioned Sam Darnold. He's another guy in this division who we have questions about. Does he take the next step? You are much more Sam Darnold pro than I am, I think.
I want Sam Darnold to get like a fair chance.
Yeah, that's
fair. Because I think Sam Darnold is like a quality quarterback talent that the Jets have ruined through the first 2 years of his career. They've given him no offensive line. He has had no weapons the last 2 years. I just want the dude to have a chance. Adam Gase is a horrible head coach. Ryan Tannehill in like year 7 of his career had his best year once he got away from Adam Gase.
Yep.
I think it was a mistake for the Jets not to fire Adam Gase after this year, or before this year, I should say. I don't know. They had actually a pretty decent draft here.
And it should be noted also that they went 7-9.
Their wide receiver core this year isn't awful. It's certainly better than it has been if everyone's healthy. They have Rashard Perriman, Jamison Crowder, Denzel Mims, who is a very talented wide receiver from Baylor they picked this year. Chris Hogan. They had a fairly decent draft this year. I like Mekhi Becton at left tackle, giant man.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite picks that they did was when they picked Ashton Davis this year, the safety from Cal, who really allowed them to trade Jamal Adams. which I think was obviously a trade they had to make because Jamal Adams wasn't really down to play there anymore after the whole situation that had transpired.
Yeah, when that trade happened, a lot of it was like, how can the Jets trade him? And I thought that was the wrong conversation to be having, because it wasn't why would they trade him, it was why would they let this organization get to the point where guys like that wouldn't want to be there. Like, that's more so the issue, because like once Jamal Adams wants out, you just have to get him out. There's no question about that. But the fact that he wanted out was the real problem. And I think that speaks to Adam Gase. I think that speaks to the front office. I think that speaks to the whole organization. They're in a bad place right now. I mean, they're one of those teams where they could win 7 games, 8 games, 9 games, maybe 10 games.
I just want Sam Darnold to get a chance, because I think he has the tools to be a very excellent quarterback if you give him A, good coaching, and B, a good team around him.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it's too late because you have a whole nother year of Adam Gase.
It might be too late. That's probably what's happened, is that they have screwed him over. They're going to get a new coach after this year. Maybe that new coach keeps him, and then he has to learn a whole new offense in year 4, and it's typically a struggle for quarterbacks learning a new offense every year. When they drafted him, they kept Todd Bowles for 1 extra year with Sam Darnold, which was an interesting move. Todd Bowles, I think, is a very good defensive coordinator. So I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I don't have high hopes for the Jets. Let's talk about the Dolphins. Tua. Right now on this Monday, is he named the starter?
Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to be the starter week 1.
Okay. Now,
I don't hate. I'm kind of a fan sometimes of quarterbacks sitting at least the first chunk of the year.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not a team that plans on winning this year anyways.
Now, I really have always been a stan for Ryan Fitzpatrick, so I'm cool with that. I'm cool with seeing a whole nother year of Fitzmagic.
Yeah.
I also feel like it would behoove the organization to sit Tua for injury history reasons as well as just developmental reasons. I think it makes them a better team in the long run. I also because some teams do this where, I mean, for the Chargers, for example, they have a veteran quarterback and then they have a guy who they just drafted who technically Tyrod is the starter, but we're pretty sure that Justin Herbert's going to come in there.
At some point, they're going to make a mistake and put Justin Herbert in.
Right. And I think that's endemic of a team that doesn't have the process mentality. Brian Flores is a really good head coach, and I think he understands what process is required. I think Kyle Shanahan showed that he knew what kind of a process was required and what each season was going to look like. And I think he mapped it out pretty much. Kyle Shanahan, that is, mapped it out pretty much when he came in. He's like, this is what this is going to look like, and it's probably going to look like this the following year, and it's going to look like this in the third year, and we're going to be happy again. I think he's moving the team in a really good direction. I think that the first step in that is to sit Tua for the year.
I would 100% agree with you. I would probably sit Tua for at least the first 12 games or so of the year, maybe let him get his feet wet towards the end of the year. But I love Brian Flores.
Yeah.
I love how he got those guys to buy in and play hard every Sunday, despite the front office's best attempts to make them lose as many games as possible last year. Mm-hmm. Which, funny enough, before the draft, before last season, Tua was like the number 1 guy in the draft who everyone wanted, and then he gets hurt. Tank for Tua was the thing that teams were doing at the beginning of last year. He gets hurt. They end up with him anyways. I'm very high on Tua. I thought Tua was probably the number 2 quarterback I would have picked in this draft. And if he wasn't hurt or had injury concerns, might have been number 1 right up there with Joe Burrows.
Yeah, I totally agree. I see big upside for Tua. He's a lefty, so that's fun.
Lefty, always fun. And I like the direction they're going in that organization. I like some of the moves they made this offseason. Byron Jones is a very good corner. Maybe a little bit overpaid, but when you have as much cap space as they had, I get it. Kyle Van Noy was a solid move. We're both, I think, very high on Matt Breida, former Niners running back, who he's going to get a chance to get maybe the bulk of the carries now. Jordan Howard will probably get a lot of the short yardage work. they have a lot of stuff going on there that I think is pushing them in a positive direction. Probably will yield a 5-11 year this year, but I think they're on the right path going forward.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think it's ultimately because they're building a culture, and it feels like the way that we talk about the Dolphins is shifting. So that's exciting. Lastly, in this division, Cam Newton, New England. Now, we've talked in a practice pod about Cam Newton, so let's keep this sort of brief. But do you think it works out?
My biggest concern with New England is not so much Cam Newton, but the just void of talent on this roster, honestly, right now. They had a lot of guys opt out. Their wide receivers right now are Julian Edelman, who's a very solid slot receiver. N'Keal Harry, who was their first-round pick last year, who had a rough year, but I think the talent is there. And then after that, they got Jacoby Myers, Demir Bird, Gunnar Olszewski, who I have no clue who that is.
Yeah, you're saying words, but they're not registering.
Yeah. Matthew Slater, who's just a special teams guy, greatest special teams player of all time, some might say. Ryan Izzo is at tight end. I do like Devin Asiasi, who they drafted this year. But they're going to have to run the ball a lot. And with some of the opt-outs they had on their defense, with Dante Hightower specifically, their defense is going to be taking a step back, I think. I think that I have a hard time betting against Bill, though.
Yeah, it's tough.
This is a tough team to gauge here.
Bill Belichick has a fire in him that is unlike any head coach that I think has ever lived. And I think he's going to scheme ways to get to 8 wins, but I just think that the talent level is it's just not good enough to get you over that hump. I think the best season that they could have is 10 wins. The worst season that they could have is 6 wins, I think. This whole division, I mean, the Patriots got worse, and every other team got a little bit better, probably. I mean, the Bills depends on Sam Darnold, or excuse me, it depends on Josh Allen, but every team probably got a little bit better, except for the Patriots. So I think that they all kind of, that's going to be one of those messy divisional games, or back and forth where every other game, like, they probably lose to each other. Like, the Jets will go 1-1 against the Patriots, and 1-1 against the Dolphins, and 1-1 against the Bills, and the Bills will go 1-1, and so on and so forth.
I think the thing that helps out the Patriots the most this year, actually, is that division, because it's not great, and I don't have super high expectations for the Jets or the Dolphins.
Yeah.
And I'm optimistic about how Cam's going to play this year.
Yeah.
I think Cam's going to play decently well. It's just it's not a great roster, and I think if it was anyone other than Bill, and if it wasn't the Patriots, we would all be a lot lower on this team than we are.
Yeah. The last thing I want to say about them is I think a good comp is, I mean, it's a fairly decent comp. I guess this year's Greg Popovich Spurs. They have no business being in the playoffs, but they almost sneak in. They almost got in there with, if not for maybe the heroic efforts of Portland to sneak in there, they probably would have gotten in there. I feel like it's going to be the same thing with the Patriots. Yeah. I think they're going to be sneaking around, maybe getting that last potential seed, and then they'll maybe fall just short. But yeah, it's tough to bet against Belichick. So that's the AFC East. AFC North. What are the Browns? Does Baker Mayfield have a do or die season? Like, is this it? Is this what he's got to do? Is this the year that he's got to make or break it?
I think if we step back for a second and look at Baker Mayfield's career to this point on the Browns, it's been an uphill battle for him. They've had 3 different offensive coordinators in 3 years, which is never good for a quarterback. I don't understand why organizations keep doing this, where they have a young quarterback and they switch the offensive coordinators every single year instead of just trying to roll with it, because you're going to be batty if you keep switching. Right. Like, you're not going to get that much better. This is a talented roster. And I think Baker Mayfield is a decent quarterback. I don't hate him. I don't love him. But at the end of the day, their wins last year, when they finished 7-9, they beat the Bengals, they beat the Dolphins, they beat the Steelers with Mason Rudolph at quarterback. They beat the Ravens week 4, which was a pretty decent win. They beat the Jets, who were starting Trevor Siemian that game, who got knocked out on the first drive, and they put in their third string Luke Falk, and they beat the Bills. So they didn't beat many good teams last year. I'm not sold on Kevin Stefanski as a head coach.
Sure.
I don't understand how they watched the Niners-Vikings playoff game, and then, we're going to go for the offensive coordinator that just got shut down by the defensive coordinator.
Right, and they were interviewing Robert Saleh also for the head coaching job, and they picked the wrong guy out of that matchup.
They picked the wrong guy in that game. I don't know. I don't think that they're that great of a team. I don't have high... Why should I believe in this team? Literally, why? It's the same shit every year. They have this great, talented roster. They're hyped up. It's this is the year the Browns finally take the next step. And then it's oops, they're 6-10 again.
Until proven otherwise, bet against the Browns.
Bet against the Browns.
Because they do this every year. And Baker, at this point in my life, I have come to be so pro player that I no longer am rooting against anyone. I'm only rooting for certain players' success more than others. And when Baker was drafted, I really disliked him.
Yeah.
Now I just don't care. And so because I didn't like him, I didn't give him a lot of credit his rookie year, where his numbers were, they were decent. 63% completion percentage, 27 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, 93.7 rating, a fine rookie season. 27 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. I'm
pretty
chilling.
solid.
His sophomore season, though, was worse. 22 touchdowns to 21 interceptions. So,
and that's with adding Odell Beckham Jr.
Right. Yeah, he's got the weapons. So I think he'll have a better season. But it's tough when you're switching out offensive coordinators, like you said. It's just, and the Browns are a doomed organization, and Stefanski and everything he said. There's no reason to believe that they will get better or that Baker will shine so hard that they'll make the playoffs miraculously.
Yeah, the BS that everyone tries to pull to excuse them for last year is Freddie Kitchen's a horrible head coach, which yes is true, but when Baker played well the last 6 games of his rookie year, it's when Freddie Kitchens took over as the offensive coordinator. And everyone was oh, this is Baker's guy. They fit so well together. They're going to get the job done. And then it's you're doing a revisionist history thing where oh, Freddie Kitchens was the problem. And I think Freddie Kitchens is a bad coach. Had no business being the head coach of the Browns. I don't understand why teams hire people like Freddie Kitchens instead of Eric Bieniemy, the Chiefs offensive coordinator. That makes no sense to me, but, here we are.
Yeah, totally agree. Now we have another big storyline, and that's involving Lamar Jackson. The way that I wrote it out was, does the league figure out Lamar Jackson? And if they do, what happens to that offense if he can't rush for 1 billion yards? I have some team stats, some team rushing stats for the Ravens that I want to just go through real quick. Because, as we know, Lamar Jackson had just this stupid rushing year where he was just ridiculous. He ran the ball for 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns. I mean, just stupid.
He's incredible.
Amazing and just ridiculous. But Mark Ingram was the team's second leading rusher at also 1,000 yards, and he had 10 touchdowns. And then their third guy had 711 yards. So, and their fourth guy had 225 yards. You'd be hard-pressed to find a team that rushes like that.
You know what the insanity is about all that?
Yeah.
You know what they drafted in the second round this year?
Who?
They drafted a running back in the second round. They drafted J.K. Dobbins in the second round, who is a fantastic running back, who will probably be the starting running back come week 8 of this year.
Well, yeah, it should be noted that Mark Ingram is 30 years old.
Yeah.
He was, I guess. Yeah, no, he is 30 years old.
Which
right now.
I don't buy into this notion that, if a player had a good year last year, turns a year older, he's just going to automatically fall off a cliff.
Sure.
I think that was more of a long-term move there, but they have an absolutely talented backfield.
Yeah, no, the rushing game, whether let's play two scenarios. One is that the league, and the reason I say quote unquote figures out Lamar is because so often in a player's second big starting year, the league sort of figures out what their trick is. They they figure out the magic trick, and they're like, you can't do that, and then the player has to figure out some different magic tricks. If Lamar is limited to just his arm and he rushes for, let's say, 600 yards, teams just figure out, like, okay, we're just going to put a bubble there. We're going to put a bubble there. We're going to figure out exactly what your patterns are. You're not going to be able to rush the same amount of yards. They still have a stupid good running game. And I also don't think you should bet against Harbaugh.
No, Harbaugh is one of the top 5 coaches in this league.
And I think the reason that you can confidently say that, and I think anyone could confidently say that, is because of how he handled the Lamar Jackson thing. They had a totally different offense, and he was completely egoless and decided, you know what, Joe Flacco, thank you for your time here. You got us a Super Bowl victory, but Lamar Jackson is a different kind of quarterback and a better quarterback, and it's time to move on. So I think in a lot of ways, just that understanding that the team is going to be better if we go in a different direction makes him one of the best coaches. And then on top of that, last year, they're 14-2. They won really good games. Also should be noted, they blew teams out. Week 1, 59-10, 7-30-16, 9-37-20, 10, 49-13, 41-7, 45-6, 42-21, 31-15, 28-10. These are like just blowouts. And so if you take away Lamar Jackson's rushing ability, which I don't expect them to fully, I don't think he'll be a 1,000-yard rusher this season. I think they will kind of bottle him up a little bit. But even if you take that away, I still think they might not blow teams out, but they're still winning 13 games.
Yeah, I think if you hold Lamar under 1,000 rushing yards for the season, that means he's probably passing for close to 5,000 passing yards.
That's
so,
the key.
Pick your poison there.
That's the question, is whether or not stopping the run is going to make a difference, because he didn't throw for a tremendous amount of yards. I mean, he threw for good yardage. But
he threw the ball, do I have the exact number here? Let me see. Okay, Lamar threw the ball 401 times last year, which was 26th in the NFL and last among quarterbacks who played 13 or more games.
Wow.
And he threw for 3,500 yards then? 3,100 yards? Yeah. And 36 touchdowns. I think that if Lamar throws the ball more, that's not necessarily a good thing for the teams he's playing.
Yeah.
I think their wide receiving core is slightly better this year. I like Devin Duvernay a lot, who they drafted out of Texas. I think Miles Boykin takes a step forward. I think Marquise Brown had actually a healthy offseason. This team is very good. They added Calais Campbell, too.
Yeah.
For nothing.
No, they're one of the teams that, they had they had riches beyond riches, and then they added more to their riches. They got even better this year. So I think we're in agreement. I don't think he has a sophomore slump.
No.
I don't think that the team gets worse than they were last year. Briefly, Big Ben, what do you think his comeback season looks like?
I think it's more interesting what happens if Big Ben doesn't come back than what happens if he does. Because I actually think he will be pretty decent. He's looked all right in camp.
Slimmer,
can still throw the ball. They have, I don't know how they have an incredible receiving core literally every year for the last goddamn 12 years. But here we are. They do. I think their offense is going to be a lot better now that they aren't starting Duck Hodges at quarterback. Who they went 8-8 last year with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph at quarterback. It's very easy, I think, for this team to go 10-6 and make the playoffs and be trouble for teams in the playoffs.
I think with this division, the Bengals don't get a ton better. The Browns don't get better, but the Steelers do get better. So, and that's another reason why I think the Ravens probably don't get much worse, is because there's not a ton of improvement in that division. But the Steelers do pose one particular threat to the Ravens now. And yeah, I think, I'm kind of always rooting against Big Ben, just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Not a great
I'm
guy.
not a giant fan of rapists.
Yeah, not a big fan. Some would say not a fan at all.
Not a fan at all.
And yeah, so, but But I do think he'll probably have a fine season. But let's just entertain real quick what happens if he doesn't.
If he doesn't.
You're right. That is way more fun.
If he plays poorly or he won't say average. He plays like an average quarterback for 10 games, gets hurt again, which is very possible. He's been very injury prone throughout his career. He's always missing a couple games. Do they move on then? There's no replacement on the roster. It's kind of a weird year to evaluate quarterbacks in the draft just because some of them might not be playing. It's one of the main reasons why I was a big proponent of them signing Jameis Winston, which they didn't do, because I thought Jameis Winston was a perfect backup for Ben Roethlisberger who could potentially step in and be much improved.
Jameis Winston is Big Ben,
yes.
Ideally. Also, kind of as a person.
A little bit. There's some similarities there.
There are similarities if you Google those two names. I think that would have been a very scheme. That's an ideal scheme fit for them. And it's still possible because Jameis, I guess he just signed a 1-year contract, right?
I believe it might have been 2 years with the Saints. I don't know, but I do know the Saints are paying Taysom Hill $21 million, and we will get to that.
Oh my God, yeah. But in any event, they have free agency options next year. Maybe Cam has a great year, and they decide Cam Newton's our guy. He's going to be the starting quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers for the next 6 years. But in most likelihood, I think they probably will stick with Ben for another year after this because, like you said, evaluating this draft class is pretty tough. And, they do have a pretty decent team. I like Mike Tomlin a lot.
I love Mike Tomlin.
So you don't want to blow it up necessarily too soon, even though it might already be over for Big Ben. We don't know. We'll find out. Bengals. I don't have much to say about the Bengals.
No. I like Joe Burrows a lot. I think they'll probably go, 4-12, 5-11. I'm hoping if they do that they don't fire their coach because I think you put your quarterback in a very tough situation then. There's upside here on the offense. I don't think the defense is all that great.
I agree. Moving on. That was the AFC North. We're going to the AFC South. A couple of big storylines here. Let's start with the Colts because I think that they're in a weird position. What we wrote on the doc was, are the Colts doomed to live in mediocrity for the foreseeable future? I think so. They were not a great team last year. They were a 9-7 team last year.
Perfectly fine.
Missed
the playoffs,
They add Phillip Rivers. Maybe they get better. Likely they get a little bit better.
Can Phillip Rivers give you one more win over Jacoby Brissett?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. But also Phillip Rivers is, at the end of his career. This is probably his last good year. And by good, I mean decent. Because last year wasn't a great year for Phillip Rivers. And they don't necessarily have a plan in place for their quarterback after that.
They drafted Jacob Eason in, I think, the third round this year, which third-round QBs who you draft are kind of like that middle of the road. Maybe they're the guy of the future, maybe not. You can kind of go either way because you didn't invest too much capital in them.
Yeah, and I think they're just a team that is going to be hovering from 6 to 9 wins for the next 4 years. They probably only do 2 years of Phillip Rivers, but even beyond that, I don't see this team. I guess I don't really have that much else to say other than I just don't see them being a competitive team really.
They might get into the playoffs. I don't see them winning a Super Bowl. Mainly because I just don't have a lot of confidence in Phillip Rivers at this point. They're a team that if they got Cam, I think they're much better off than having Phillip Rivers. I think they're a very fun team to make a franchise with in Madden.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot you can do there. But I'm interested to see how it plays out. Because I think they do. I think that division is just okay. I think there's a very solid chance they get into the playoffs, but I don't see them beating Kansas City. I don't see them beating Baltimore. I don't even see them necessarily beating Pittsburgh if things shake out right for them. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out. I don't have the highest hopes for them. I think there's a ceiling there.
Next storyline. Is Ryan Tannehill the answer? Did the Titans overachieve last year? Or are they for real? What do you think of Vrabel?
I think Vrabel's a good coach.
I do too. I kind of believe in him a lot.
Yeah, because there's like two types of good coaches in the NFL, really. There's the X's and O's guys who, like Kyle Shanahan, for example, very good at scheming up plays, Andy Reid, Sean McVay, those type of guys. And then there's the Mike Tomlin, John Harbaugh type of guys who get their guys to buy in. And I think Mike Vrabel is in that second group there. I think he gets those guys to play hard for him every single week. I think what the Texans have going for them is they have an identity as a team. They're going to be run the ball down your throat with Derrick Henry and have an excellent defense, which added Jadeveon Clowney to it. So, again, they're a team where, speaking on Ryan Tannehill, I don't think he's fantastic. But I think he fits what they want to do.
Yeah, I've always been a big Tannehill stan, so I'm happy that he's finding some success. I expect the Ravens to be a better playoff team than they were last year going into this year, so I expect the Ravens to be in the AFC Championship, not the Titans, but I don't think necessarily that means that the Titans take a step back, I
think I'm very interested to see the Titans and the Colts match up this year because I think that's a very solid battle.
Yeah.
I cannot wait until week 17 when they're both 8-7 and fighting for that division title.
This one is less of a question and more of just like a 30-second rant. How will Bill O'Brien ruin this year?
By trading DeAndre Hopkins for David Johnson.
Fantastic.
I think, really quick, speaking on Bill O'Brien, I think Bill O'Brien is a good coach. I think he's maybe the worst GM in the league. I cannot point you to the last good move that Bill O'Brien has made as general manager.
It's pretty rocky.
It's not been good.
Last question in the division. And just give me a yes or no on this. Is Gardner Minshew Baker Mayfield?
Yes. Read that how you will.
All right, so that's the AFC. We're now moving on to the NFC. We're going to start in our beloved NFC West.
Oh, man.
The best division in football.
Yeah, I think it's very possible every team in this division finishes 500 or above.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's start with our Niners. The question that you posed is, why does everyone hate the Niners?
That I don't have an answer for that. Because I look at a team that won 13 games last year, went to the Super Bowl, was very close to winning. You could say they're a missed Jimmy G throwaway. You could say they're a couple of missed holding calls away, however you want to frame it. They lost to Forrest Buckner, replaced him with Javon Kinlaw, who obviously is not DeForest Buckner, but I think he's very good still. They lost Joe Staley, replaced him with Trent Williams, who I think is a slight upgrade over Joe Staley at this point in their careers. They get Jerick McKinnon hopefully healthy. They draft Brandon Nyuk, who everything I'm hearing from camp and from literally the second Kyle Shanahan drafted him, it's seeing how excited Shanahan was.
He's not an emotional guy either.
He's not an emotional guy, and he was absolutely elated. And the fact that they thought about picking him with their first pick, oh boy. I think the big thing for this team's going to be health. If they can stay healthy, I don't see any reason that they don't win at least 12 games this year.
Yeah, the health is definitely always going to be a concern, particularly for the Niners right now. But also the only other concern I have is just how good the division is. The Niners got off to an incredible start last year. They were able to build momentum off of that. By the time they're 8-0, they realize they're the best team in the league, or one of. This year they probably won't start the same because I think that the Cardinals got better. Mm-hmm. If there's a week one upset where the Cardinals win, I wouldn't be shocked. I'd be upset, but I wouldn't be shocked just because the Cardinals did get better.
Then they face the Jets the next week. So right. You're going to get right against the Jets if you lose week 1.
And the Giants week 3. So that's a 2-1 start.
Then they got the Eagles, who might have, I don't know, maybe they'll have a dummy out there at quarterback. They might have, who knows what the Eagles are going to have at quarterback because everyone gets hurt on that team.
Yeah, even much worse than the Niners in terms of injuries.
Yeah. They're already hurt.
Yeah. There are only 2 ways that the season goes for Jimmy G. I'm going to be completely binary in this. One, he has a good year where he completes 72% of his passes, but throws for like 24 touchdowns and 12 interceptions and like 3,500 yards. He just has no stats to whatsoever because the running game is just monstrous all year. Raheem Mostert and Tico both have over 800 yards. That kind of a season. The other season is Raheem Mostert gets injured for 4 games. Tico gets injured for 4 games. Jeff Wilson Jr. becomes the starting running back for 2 weeks, And
catches 500 passes.
Catches 500 passes and rushes for 20 yards. In that timeline, Jimmy G is more than capable of also throwing 36 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, 4,500 yards, I think. I think he can give you whatever you ask for. And I think that's why I like Jimmy so much, is because there's no ego in throwing less than 10 passes in the NFC Championship game. But he also wins shootouts against the Saints like he did last year. So, like, he'll give you whatever you want. He's flexible in that way.
The narrative that Jimmy G is a bad quarterback because the 49ers rushed for over 300 yards in the NFC Championship game makes little to no sense to me. If you can run the ball for like 7 yards a carry literally every single time and you have the lead, I don't understand why you would pass it.
It's, I'd say, top 5 worst takes of the season last year. Yeah, that Jimmy was bad because he didn't throw the ball. I mean, if he threw the ball 9 times and he completed 1 pass, there's reason to be concerned. I think he went 7 for 9.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are we talking about?
Look, there's a lot of talk on whether Jimmy G is a good quarterback or not. And you can certainly have that discussion. I think there is a very obvious answer that he is. But what it boils down for me is, can you win a Super Bowl with Jimmy G as your quarterback? And I think the answer is very clearly yes, because they were very close last year.
They won the Super Bowl through 3.5 quarters.
Yeah. Oh man, we'll do a whole pod on the 49ers Super Bowl one day.
But just lastly, because we could obviously talk about the Niners all day, but I think to answer the question of why does everyone hate the Niners, I think there's 2 predominant reasons. 3. One, they are a legacy team. They were a team that, they're one of the best franchises in NFL history. That comes with just, a certain amount of criticism. Anyone who grew up in the 80s watching Joe Montana and Jerry Rice is going to dislike the Niners a little bit if you were a fan of another team. That's one reason, but it's one of the smaller reasons. Second reason, Jimmy G got paid before he proved he was a good quarterback. So immediately everyone was like, are you kidding me? That was the first, because I mean, if you're not a Niners fan or a Patriots fan, you don't know who Jimmy Garoppolo is when he gets his contract. So immediately you're like, are you kidding me? That's your first impression of Jimmy Garoppolo is what? So I think that's one reason that teams or that people dislike Jimmy and dislike the Niners. I think the third reason,
he's hot.
He's hot. You're right. He's a hot dude.
Look, that game against the Jags was all I needed to see when Jimmy put up a whole bunch of points on one of the best defenses of the last 10 years.
Feels great, baby. But the NFC West has a couple of other big storylines, particularly the Seahawks. Is their championship window with Russ closing, or has it closed already? That's kind of that's a good like ESPN, like right before you go to break thing.
Yeah. And we'll be right back after these messages.
Because I think you're never out of it with Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson makes the Seahawks so competitive and so dangerous, and they're the team that I would least like to see in the playoffs if I'm the Niners, because they're the one team that could they're the one kryptonite source. And those 2 teams, good God, those 2 games last year just delivered so strong. I do think that the window's already over, though. I think it's closed.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that they're going to be bad. I think they're going to be good until Russ retires. But I think that their potential to win Super Bowls it's in the rearview mirror at this point.
I like the weapons they have on offense a lot. I like DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Chris Carson, Greg Olsen they added this year. If he's healthy, that's a decent piece. Their offensive line is bad for like the 7th straight year. Their defense, the secondary, I think, is pretty solid. The defensive line is atrocious. I don't know how they're going to get any pass rush going with that defensive line when I think old Bruce Irvin, is probably your best pass rusher at this point in time.
And also their offense can become quite anemic. The Ravens never had a bad, necessarily, offensive game last year. The Seahawks can go into a game and they can score 9 points on just field goals. Like they have some bad offensive games every now and then. And also, I think Pete Carroll, like you were talking about with head coaches when we were talking about Vrabel, Pete Carroll is sort of one of those guys that just he's a motivator. He gets the team behind him, but in crunch time moments, there's a lot of mistakes that Pete Carroll does make, especially clock management issues. The Seahawks win that second game, the Week 17 game against the Niners, if Pete Carroll is aware that the play clock is running out, because Marshawn Lynch was coming into the game at the 1 yard line to score the game-winning touchdown.
Which, first of all, such a weird storyline that happened last year, where it's like the last game of the season, they're like, we're going to sign Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah.
That was fascinating. I do like the addition of Jamal Adams, and that scares me a little bit just because I think Jamal Adams is a fantastic player. But they also lost Clowney, who absolutely murdered the 49ers on that Monday night game. And their current defensive line is set up like so. Rasheem Green, Bruce Irvin, Jaron Reed, and Poona Ford. Not necessarily stuff that I'm scared of, if I'm specifically the 49ers.
Yeah, no, I mean, having Jamal Adams, he's a big-time playmaker, but if the defensive line looks like that, just hand the ball off to Raheem Mostert, and you got no problem with Jamal Adams in the backfield. Yeah, so I don't totally believe in their defense, and I don't totally believe in their offense either. I just believe in Russell Wilson. That's it.
Yeah, and I think it's very possible Russell Wilson could carry them to 11 wins, but I also think it's highly possible that they end up 8-8 because they're just not a great team.
They're also historically bad to start the year.
Mm-hmm.
This is why Russell Wilson is never really going to win an MVP, even though he's always in the camp of maybe being able to. It's because they start the year so poorly. The first 4 games, they just don't look like the Seahawks at all. And then they come along, and then by the end of the season, it's like, wow, Russ was kind of underrated. Like, why didn't we talk about him more? It's because for the first 4 weeks of the season, he wasn't in the conversation. So then by the time he becomes a part of the conversation, it's already like, well, Lamar's already the MVP.
Yeah.
You know? So I just don't see them having... I don't even see a fluke scenario where they win, the wild card game, the divisional, the conference championship, and then the Super Bowl.
It took Carson Wentz getting his head chopped off by Jadeveon Clowney and them having to put in 42-year-old Josh McCown, who was playing on one leg for like the second half of that game, in order for the Seahawks to get to the second round to get defeated by a not-so-great Packers team that got murdered by the 49ers the next week.
Very well put. I agree. Kyler Murray. For whatever reason, he's a dark horse MVP betting favorite. Do the Cardinals cannibalize the Rams, and to some extent the Seahawks, but more so the Rams, and help to sink LA to a sub-7 win season? This is the most interesting thing for me, because the Cardinals, I think, got a lot better, and the Rams stayed the same for the most part.
Yeah.
And they weren't very good last year, and they were kind of lucky to have as many wins as they did in some ways.
The Rams are just underwhelming as a team. I guess we'll do both the Cardinals and the Rams right now.
It's kind of a
duo here. The Rams have pieces, right?
They sure do.
They certainly have a talented roster. For whatever reason, that roster didn't play up to the levels it should have last year. So is there a world where the Rams bounce back and go 12-4? I certainly think it's possible. I don't think it's probable, but it could happen. At the same time, is there also a world where Jared Goff takes another step back and they end up 6-10? Yeah, I think so. It's all going to come down to Jared Goff, I think.
And I, myself, am sort of out on Jared Goff. I think he's a fine quarterback. I think he could be a part of our great QB swap.
2.0.
2.0. I think the idea of the great QB swap is just like you have a bunch of average to slightly above average guys that could be swapped, and then maybe they would be each team would be a little bit better, just
or at least fun.
Yeah,
or at least be fun to do.
Yeah, and I think Jared Goff fits the mold into that as well. Offhand, I mean, how much longer is his contract? Is he there?
It has not. His extension has not started yet, I don't think.
Okay.
I think next year, or either this year or next year, is when his big extension kicks in.
Okay, so they're stuck with him. So, I mean, that's really the problem with the Rams is they
went all in and they didn't win.
Yeah, they went all in. They didn't win. They got hitched to a bunch of guys that they believed in at the time. I mean, the Todd Gurley contract is the most egregious. He's not on the team anymore, and they're still, how much is it? Like $20 million sunk on that?
Something like that.
Just a silly amount of money. It's kind of a horror story, honestly. Like they were the team of the next decade.
Mm-hmm.
They were going to be the best thing since sliced bread. And sliced bread,
pretty darn good.
It's pretty good.
I'm a fan of sliced bread.
But yeah, like you said, they're still super talented, and there is a world where they go 12-4. But in a world where the Cardinals get better, the Seahawks stay pretty good, and the Niners also are one of the top 3 teams in the NFL. That's just tough. That's just, if they're in any other division, if they're in a bad division, they probably
win the AFC East.
For sure.
They probably win the NFC North.
They win 6 divisional games, and then but in this division, they could lose 6 divisional games. I mean, it's that tough. So I think just as a straight answer to that question, I think the Cardinals are probably gonna. There's a chance that the Cardinals beat them 2-0, and then if that happens in that universe where the Cardinals go 2-0 against the Rams, it means that the Rams are 6-10 or 7-9. So, any other thoughts on the NFC West before we move on?
I want to briefly touch on the Cardinals here. I think the reason why Kyler Murray is considered a dark horse for the MVP is people are looking at what Lamar Jackson did last year and saying, oh, Kyler Murray's another mobile quarterback in his second year. Maybe he could do something like that. I like Kyler Murray a lot. I'm very high on Kyler Murray. I don't think he's going to have the type of year Lamar Jackson had, mainly because I think the scheme's different. I don't think they use him as much as a rusher as the Ravens do Lamar. That being said, I definitely think we see a step forward from Kyler Murray this year, and I think the Cardinals are one of the teams that scares me the most in the NFC West.
You make a great point there. The Ravens use Lamar as a runner, and within the Cardinals offense, Kyler is a scrambler. It's not quite.
There's very few designed runs in there. They do whip it out every now and then, but the whole Ravens scheme is built around Lamar as a runner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the upside with Kyler is strong, but not strong enough that I would put a bunch of money on Kyler Murray as an MVP, especially in a world where Lamar Jackson and Pat Mahomes are still Lamar Jackson and Pat Mahomes.
Yes.
And I'm expecting a Pat Mahomes MVP season this year. So tough luck, Kyler. Going to the NFC East, the Cowboys. Dak Prescott, contract situation. Again. Is the big contract inevitable? Are they already tied to him? Is it already over? Is Dak now their quarterback?
Oh man,
and just real quick, because I feel like Dak and Tony Romo are 2 totally different quarterbacks, but it feels almost like we're just repeating history because the same thing was going on with Tony. I mean, Tony got paid because I think that Jerry Jones just really liked Tony Romo as a guy, but Tony Romo was every year, it's like, is he really the Cowboys starting quarterback? And it's still the same with Dak. It's like, is he going to be the starting quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys?
And here's the problem with that.
Yeah.
If you have to ask yourself that question of, oh, should we pay this guy? The answer is probably no. Yeah. For me personally, if I was ever going to make a $35 million a year investment in something, if I am not 100% sure about said $35 million investment, probably going to be about, like $250 to $300 million overall. I don't think I'm pulling the trigger on that.
I agree. I think...
And I like Dak, by the way.
That's what I was going to say, is I don't think the problem is Dak. I think it's the Cowboys. I think the Cowboys, I mean, for as much as Jerry Jones is, beloved, Jerry Jones is the problem. I don't think that the Cowboys, for as long as Jerry is, still around, are going to be a truly competitive NFL franchise. They're not really a football team. They're a pageantry show.
They're a brand. It's just, I don't see... I think it's best for Dak to not be a Dallas Cowboy. Mm-hmm.
I think it's best for every quarterback to not be a Dallas Cowboy quarterback. You're under a level of scrutiny that's just stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because... I mean, it's because the media is also sort of an extension of Jerry Jones. Like, he uses the media how he wants the media used. He leaks stories. He did this whole thing that being the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, it's worth more than $35 million. You get all the babes, just like stupid nonsense that doesn't make any sense.
We're living in 1972 still, guys.
He's trying to convince Dak that he's trying to gaslight Dak.
He's trying to gas.
So I mean, it's also tough because like now you have familiarity with this team. New offense, though. Mm-hmm. Mike McCarthy coming in, new head coach.
Similar offense. Yeah. Kellen Moore still offensive coordinator. We'll
right.
see how much. I think Mike McCarthy should let Kellen Moore, Boise State legend,
absolutely,
just run the offense. But I have a fun one for you here.
Okay.
You ready for this one?
Totally ready.
Big Ben retires. Dak signs with the Steelers this offseason.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I think, but also if you said any quarterback retires and Dak goes there, I'd be like, yeah, I love that too. Just because I want to see Dak, because I think Dak's a good guy. He seems like a nice fella, and I think he has upside. Like I said, he's in the same camp as Carson Wentz and Jimmy G, and so if I believe in Jimmy G, I got to believe in them a little bit at least, So him going to the Steelers, also like a legacy franchise, but for, also just a better franchise historically.
Better run franchise.
Yeah, and so...
Mike Tomlin as the head coach?
I think that works out tremendously for Dak. I think that the Steelers improve. They're a better team that way.
Now, what I need not to happen is the Niners to lose the Super Bowl again and Dak become a free agent, so I don't have to hear 3 months of the Niners should sign Dak and trade Jimmy G.
I mean, we're still hearing that the Niners should trade for Kirk Cousins in some circles.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
But let's say that Dak, sure, he goes to the Steelers. He goes to anywhere. Tua dies, and he goes to Miami. Anywhere.
Tua gets hit by a bus and breaks his hip again.
It's a tragic day in the NFL, but Dak is just like, yes. Any number of situations happens. If he's not the guy in Dallas, if he decides he's not the guy in Dallas, or if Jerry Jones decides he's not the guy in Dallas, then what are the Cowboys? Are they rocking with Andy Dalton?
Probably not.
I mean,
what are they going to do? Sign Cam because Jerry loves a star?
Yeah, I mean, and then you got 6 years of maybe injury riddled Cam Newton.
Probably about 3 until Cam retires.
Yeah. So I mean, and like we said, this is a tough draft this year, and you're not in a position where you're tanking. You're not going to have the number 1 pick.
Their window's kind of this year.
Yeah.
Because after this year, you're either going to have to find a new quarterback or you're going to have to pay your quarterback big money, which we have seen multiple times kind of shrinks your window because you cannot... When you have a quarterback on a cheap contract, that's the best time to win if you have your guy. Because once you're paying them $30 million a year, you don't got a lot of cap space for other places.
And they're just a couple of injuries away from being a 2-win team. Like if Ezekiel Elliott, God forbid, gets injured, he's on contract for just a bunch of money.
The whole lot of them are. Pretty much everyone but Dak they signed.
That's right. And I don't know why Jerry is just like, no, yeah, I can bet on a running back and not a quarterback.
Running backs get hurt eventually.
Yeah.
Right? Like
even if they don't get hurt eventually, they still just, and they do get hurt eventually, but their production just goes down over time. Quarterbacks can improve until they're 35. if they're a real superstar talent.
Matt Ryan is 36 years old and still gives you a very good chance to win football games.
And he will have a better year this year than he did last year.
I would hope so.
Yeah, and that whole team, and we'll get to the Falcons, but I mean, the Cowboys, I think you're right. This is the one shot. I don't think Mike McCarthy is the type of guy who's going to come in there and be like, well, Dak's not my guy. I got to get someone else. I think he is. I mean, I think he's sort of an affable individual. I think he's more than comfortable with keeping Dak or letting Dak go. I don't think he has much care either way. But whatever happens, if he stays, if he goes, I don't see them as a competitive NFL franchise. Before we jump off of the Cowboys, I do just want to ask about the Jason Garrett, Mike McCarthy thing. In your opinion, does Mike McCarthy give them something that Jason Garrett did not? Was he the problem in Dallas?
I think Mike McCarthy gives them a good head coach, which is something they didn't have before. I cannot tell you what Jason Garrett is good at other than not getting fired by Jerry Jones for 10 years without winning anything.
I'll tell you what he's good at. Blackmail. He had dirt on Jerry Jones. That's what.
The clapper, as he's known in some circles. You just always see him clapping, no matter what. He's just not like how he wasn't. It's been talked about him being on the hot seat for a good 6 years now, which that's never a good sign.
No, I mean, Marvin Lewis was also in a similar situation, but I like Marvin Lewis a little bit more than that.
Because I think Marvin Lewis is at least a good defensive head coach. I cannot tell you. I guess we'll see in New York this year now that Jason Garrett's the offensive coordinator of the Giants, but
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Oh no, Daniel Jones. Oh no, rest in peace.
Rest in peace, Danny Dimes.
Oh, he was so young. Yeah, Jason Garrett, truly, it was just, he was family with Jerry. And that's, again, why they're not a competitive NFL franchise, is because Jerry is so old that it still is like an old-timey American, like, family business. You know, it doesn't make any sense. Like,
Jerry thinks he's running the insurance firm out here.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, Jason Garrett, he's a good-hearted kid. You know, he's not the brightest, but he's a good-hearted kid. And
he works hard.
Yeah.
Does okay.
I think that Mike McCarthy I think he elevates them from an 8-win team to like a 10-11 win team in most circumstances. So that's the Dallas Cowboys. They've been talked about plenty. Going on to Carson Wentz. I don't have a ton to say about Carson Wentz. It's more just like, I guess two things. Does the injury history concern you? Do you think that he is doomed in that capacity? And then do you think he takes a step forward or backward this year? Because he was an MVP frontrunner at one point.
Before he tore his ACL.
Yeah.
Carson Wentz threw for 4,000 yards last year. None of his wide receivers had more than 500 receiving yards, which is just remarkable. Carson Wentz is a very good quarterback for the 14 games a year that he plays, and then he gets hurt in week 16 and is out for the playoffs. My biggest concern with Carson Wentz is not his play, because I think when he plays, he gives you a chance to win every game, and he's an excellent quarterback. The big questions with him are, is he going to play? Because you really never know. He's already dealing with some lingering injuries right now, and we haven't even started games yet. So, I don't have a lot of confidence in him staying healthy as much as I would like to see that happen.
Because already through training camp, there was, I think, a lower body injury. He was sort of day-to-day on his leg or something like that, his hip. It seems like he's just not a particularly durable individual, and that's trouble. He's, if he plays 16 games, he's one of the best 12 quarterbacks in the NFL, certainly, and he can fluctuate anywhere from 12 to, 4 on any given day. I think even with, like you said, even with all the injuries, they were still a 9-7 team last year, right? Yeah, 9-7. Mm-hmm. So I expect the team to be better, and I expect Carson to play really well. I'm going to go ahead and just say that he will not play a full season.
Yeah, which is funny because last year he did play 16 games and then he got hurt in the playoff game.
Right. So, it could happen at any time. And fortunately, it happened in the playoffs instead of week 1.
Yeah, which I do think is why I think it was actually a good idea for them to draft Jalen Hurts, which a lot of people hated that, mainly because they picked him in the second round. But I like Jalen Hurts. I think you can do some stuff with him. And I think if Carson Wentz does go down, he gives you a at least decent quarterback option. And if Carson Wentz doesn't go down, there's at least some fun packages you could put Jalen Hurts in.
Yeah. Here's a scenario for you. Nick Foles doesn't work out in Chicago. They're like, we'll just eat this money. I don't care.
We'll cut him.
And he decides, I'll just go be a legendary backup quarterback in Philadelphia for 10 more years.
Philly would take him in a heartbeat.
I wish that there was a world that we lived in where Nick Foles was still the backup quarterback and then could just step in during the playoffs and win Super Bowls for the Eagles every year. This is an interesting question. What does a good season look like for Washington and for New York? And what has to go right to make that happen?
So I think for Washington, a good season isn't so much quantified in wins, but more so if you see improvement from Dwayne Haskins and can see him being your quarterback of the future. Because, again, Dwayne Haskins is going to be one of these QBs that falls into the camp of if he doesn't do good, I feel like we give QBs kind of a short leash sometimes.
Totally agree.
And for first-round QBs, I feel like you got to stretch that out a little bit. And I would like to see Dwayne Haskins get at least one more a year after this because I think he's a talented guy. But I don't know if it's going to happen.
It's funny how the different sports work. You draft Joel Embiid, number 1, and you can sit him for 2 years with injury, and then even beyond that, like he'll have 5 more years before you're like, we're out on him.
Okay, this guy, we can't build around this guy.
Yeah. But with quarterbacks, it's
which we all say is the hardest position in sports.
Right.
Like if this 21-year-old isn't good, get him out of here.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and the difference between college and the NFL is so steep. It's a tough gig for these quarterbacks who get ousted so early. And I think also the big problem is like they're getting drafted by the worst teams in the NFL, and so there's coordinator and head coach shifting constantly. And I think you saw this with, like we talked about with the Browns, the reason that they're shifting around and moving coordinators and head coaches is because they are afraid to admit defeat on the pick before they're willing to admit defeat on like the coach or the coordinator or something like that. They're looking for some sort of scapegoat, and then that inadvertently hurts the quarterback as well. So
just write it out for 3 years. Yeah. Give a quarterback 3 years, at least 2 of them with the same offensive coordinator. Give them a chance. I want to see guys get chances.
I think Washington is in a better place than the Giants are right now, just because I think Ron Rivera is a good coach.
Yeah, I believe in Ron Rivera more than I believe in Joe Judge.
Yeah.
Also, that D-line on Washington is terrific, which we saw with the 49ers. Having a good D-line really does make the rest of your defense better. So we'll see how it goes. I don't have great expectations for them, but I think they could, at best, maybe finish as like a 7-win team.
I think so. I think I'm more inclined to give them 7 wins than 4 wins.
Yeah.
Moving on to the NFC North. You wrote very aptly, is this division bad?
I do not think this division's that good.
I want to start with the Packers first, just because I mentioned it before, but they're an inflated win team. Last year, they were 13-3, and they basically didn't play anybody. And when they did, they got smacked around.
Yeah.
They played the Niners twice, once in the playoffs, once in the postseason, and they got smacked around. Aaron Rodgers is no joke. Aaron Rodgers is a real good quarterback. But
they refuse to give weapons to.
They refuse to give him anything. They got Devontae Adams, but I mean, I guess Jordan Love can line up at wide receiver.
And apparently he's looked awful in camp.
Which it's really easy to be right about quarterbacks in the NFL draft because most of them don't work out. But I do feel I do feel like that was pretty easy to see. I didn't have high hopes for Jordan Love.
I think my evaluation of Jordan Love was there was great upside there, but an abysmally low floor. I think a lot of people got tricked into thinking he was somehow going to be Patrick Mahomes because they're like, oh, he's this playmaking, big-armed quarterback who's a little inconsistent at times. But how often do you see maybe the greatest QB talent of all time? Not often. I think trying to compare anyone to Patrick Mahomes is a super stretch.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would have personally rather taken a chance on him than Justin Herbert for me, just because I don't think Justin Herbert's very good. We've been over this.
Yeah, we both have tests for that.
Yeah. But I don't understand how they went through this whole offseason where their biggest issue was the wide receiving core and not getting a single wide receiver addition on the team. They also lost right tackle Brian Bulaga, who was a very good right tackle. I don't think their line is particularly great at this point. I do like their defense, which is funny because it got absolutely torn apart by the Niners both times. So I don't know. Will they probably still win like 11 games and win the division? Yeah. Do I think they're probably going to be one of the worst 11-win teams we've seen? Yeah.
Yeah. So their schedule is going to be tougher this year. I don't have the schedule in front of me, and I don't care. But I mean, their schedule will be a little tougher just because they finished with that first place. Their one bad schedule, like if the Packers had the misfortune of having the toughest schedule in the NFL, they're a 7-win team, maybe an 8 to 9 win team, just on the back of Aaron Rodgers' pure arm talent, and potentially some solid defense. I don't believe in the Packers. I'm getting real down on the Packers.
Yeah.
Moving on. Matthew Stafford is interesting to me because I like him a lot. I think he's a pretty good quarterback, but what's the point of keeping Matthew Stafford around if your team's just going to suck every year?
What? Yeah. Matthew Stafford was on pace to have the best year of his career before he got hurt last season. He was playing extremely well. But we have never seen Matthew Stafford make that team, like, good. Like a team where you're like, okay, they have a legitimate shot to win the NFC, let alone a Super Bowl.
Right.
Yeah, I think Matt Patricia is not a good coach. And my evaluation of that comes from the fact that anytime a player has left the Lions in recent year, they talk about how much they hated it there. Yeah. Specifically thinking of Darius Slay.
Which is uncommon. Players don't usually just trash their former team.
Yeah.
You know? They're usually just like, yeah, even if they had disagreements with the head coach, it's like, on to better things. But no, yeah, there's some trashing going on. People don't like Matt Patricia.
A big problem I think we see with a lot of former New England coordinators when they become head coaches is they try to coach the same way Bill does, which is very tough, very, gets everyone in line, his way or the highway. And that only works if you have wins and championships to back that up. If you're Matt Patricia and you haven't won anything, why should I think it's your way or the highway? And I think we see a similar thing with Bill O'Brien sometimes. They're just not good. Like, honestly, I am kind of bored talking about the Lions. They're not a team I particularly like to watch. They're not a team I find particularly interesting. They got some pieces there. I like Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones, but they signed Adrian Peterson for some reason this last week, which didn't make sense because they have Kerryon Johnson, who they put a lot of draft capital into, and then they drafted DeAndre Swift, who they put a lot of draft capital into just this year. So I don't know what they're doing there.
It's a sweet Madden move.
It's a sweet Madden move where you just need a depth running back.
Last thing, just quickly about the Lions, because I do feel like they're basically NyQuil in an NFL team form. Matthew Stafford's only 31 years old.
That's incredible to me.
Really, shocking. I thought he was at least 35. He's 31 years old, so he still has a career ahead of him. I think that there's trade value in a guy like Matthew Stafford, and he's not making your team better. I mean, It's one of those things that I just don't understand why they don't move off of him. I mean, he's a good quarterback, but you're not improving at any point. He's like him and Andy Dalton. I think he's a lot better than Andy Dalton, but like
I think so too.
The Bengals were like, Andy Dalton's just not working. It's time to move off of him.
You're not going to get over the hump with Matt Stafford on the Lions. Obviously, he's not going to get traded at this point or during the season because every team's kind of locked and ready to go. I do think there's maybe a possibility that this offseason he could get moved. It would make sense to me to do that. Teams that come to mind are, New York or Washington if they decide to move off their quarterbacks. I think Washington in particular will be very interesting with him. Maybe the Patriots go for it. Matt Patricia, Bill Belichick connection, although I think Matt Patricia's getting fired, so that doesn't really matter.
I like that, actually. I like that fit. I think him going to the Patriots, that'd be a good quarterback for Bill Belichick. But also, anyone would.
Yeah. Any half-decent quarterback is going to be a good option in New England. So we'll see what happens. I think Matt Stafford is very good. I think he's one of the more underappreciated quarterbacks of recent memory. And yeah, I kind of hope Detroit cuts ties with him because I want him to be free. That's not a winning organization.
Yeah. Also, for those of you listening, go look up the 2011 season. Not just for Matt Stafford, but for all the quarterbacks. It was the most stupidly good year. Everybody had like 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns. Matt Stafford himself had like 40-plus touchdowns. It was a stupid year.
I miss watching Matt Stafford throw the ball to Calvin Johnson.
That was a lot of fun. But also it wasn't.
Because they wouldn't win games.
They wouldn't win games.
They'd go 8-8 every year.
They were nice on highlight tape, just because like you could skip the boring nonsense. But yeah, enough of the Lions. We gave them more time than I think any other podcast has in the last 10 years.
Well, because they don't deserve it.
You're right. Just give me a number on this one. When does Mitch Trubisky get dumped for Nick Foles? How many games? Or does it happen?
After week 6, I'll say. I don't have their schedule in front of me, but that sounds like about the right period of time where they think maybe they have enough time to save the season. They're probably like 2-4 or something at that point. They think maybe, we can slip up to 9-7, slip into the playoffs. There is the extra playoff spot this year, I believe. 6 games seems about right.
All right. Moving on to the NFC South. And this is our last division.
Boy, oh boy, we made it.
It's a division of last chances.
It really is.
For the Saints, it could be their last chance, and for the Bucs, it could be their first and last chance. Let's start with the Saints.
I'm throwing the Falcons in that group too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, Matt Ryan
is older.
Is old.
He's a lot older than you thought. I would think Matt Stafford would be about the same age as Matt Ryan.
Totally agree.
But they're not.
I think. Actually, let's start with the Falcons because the Falcons they finished the season 7-9. They were actually a very good team down the stretch. They started the year off horribly, but I don't expect them to be that bad again coming into next year. I think that I think they could win 9 games.
I think easily. They're a team that's in literally every single game.
Totally. I mean, they put it. It was a back and forth with the Niners, and it was a highly competitive game, and that was one of the best teams in the NFL last year. I think as long as Matt Ryan stays healthy, you have a pretty good shot of winning like 9 games.
I don't think we appreciate Julio Jones. I think he's one of the all-time wide receiver talents. Like all-time, I'm talking like top 5 wide receiver talents.
And just don't forget that he did his 40 with like a broken foot.
Yeah, he did his whole combine. He's dominated the combine.
Yeah, gosh, yeah. Julio Jones is a madman. He's so talented. But for the Falcons, I mean, Dan Quinn is kind of on the hot seat. Matt Ryan, towards the end of his career, maybe Julio Jones kind of gets fed up at some point, and he's like, at the end of this contract, I'm going to go ahead and sign somewhere else. It does seem like they're getting one step closer to a rebuild. So I think this is their last shot. The world in which that they can actually compete and get into the playoffs and maybe have a run is they have to be healthy, number 1. Number 2, Matt Ryan has to return to peak Matt Ryan form, which I think is totally doable. And then 3, the Bucs have to underperform and all those teams have to kind of cannibalize. And I think that's totally possible. I think that like there's a chance that everyone in that division is like 7 to 10 wins. That's pretty much all I have to say about the Falcons.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is actually going to come down to Todd Gurley. I think if you get a healthy Todd Gurley, and I'm not talking about Todd Gurley who plays 16 games. I'm not talking about the number of games he plays. I'm talking about him like physically, like his knees working, and him being Todd Gurley of 2 years ago, where he was just absolutely terrific. I think there's enough talent on their roster. They're got some solid wide receivers, very top heavy for them with Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. I like Hayden Hurst at tight end. Their offensive line isn't great. It's probably in the bottom third or quarter of the league, so that's somewhat concerning. And they need the defense to take a step forward, because the defense was the reason that they were in so many shootouts last year. It was not because their offense was so great, which it is a quality offense, but that their defense just was not very good.
Before we talk the Saints and Bucks, Panthers, any thoughts at all? Because I have very few.
I really like their offense.
We both like Teddy Bridge.
Love Teddy B, Teddy Two Gloves, big fan. Their defense is young and has pieces that I don't think are quite there yet. Specifically in the secondary. I think their D-line's pretty solid, but I like their offense. I like DJ Moore. Christian McCaffrey's phenomenal. They will be a team that puts up points, and it's going to be in a lot of shootouts, I think, this year.
They're a team that could skip the rebuild, possibly.
Potentially.
They move off of the Cam Newton era, and they go straight into the Teddy B era. They could, not be, they won't be 13-win seasons these next couple of years, but they could possibly avoid being like a 3-4 win team for 5 straight years. So, good for them. And we wish Teddy the best of luck.
I think they're going to be one of those teams where it's going to be in December and you don't necessarily want to have them on your schedule regardless of what their record is.
Yeah, you can't necessarily count that as a W for your team. Now let's talk Saints. Saints got better.
They did get better. Saints are probably one of the top 4 teams in the NFL.
The last 4 or 5 years for the Saints has been sort of tragic. It's like they're about to get the promotion at their job, and then they get the phone call, your brother just died in a car accident. God. And then it's like, oh God, what could go worse? And then they get another phone call, and it's like, your wife, she's been tragically murdered. It's just the worst, and I feel so bad for the Saints fans because the Minnesota games and just the way that their playoffs have ended has been nothing short of tragic. They're so talented. They could have, just as any team in the NFL for the last 4 or 5 years, they could have won multiple Super Bowls. They're a great team, and I love Drew Brees. He's my favorite quarterback for as long as I've been watching it.
Until he made those comments.
That was really upsetting.
It was very disappointing. There was a minute there where I thought his team was just not going to play for him.
God, that was...
But it looks like he's trying now.
Yeah, he very quickly backed off, and he was like, I made a mistake. So I hope that he genuinely feels that.
Then he called out Trump for what Trump was saying, which was a turn of events. And
so I hope that...
I'm hoping there's a character arc there.
Yeah, because he is a sincerely kind-hearted individual. He does a lot of work with the military, with charities, with all sorts of things. So I'm always pulling for Drew Brees as a person, as a quarterback. I think he's immensely talented. He's kind of underrated. He's one of the best quarterbacks to ever have lived. I mean, completion percentage, passing yards, passing touchdowns, nutty numbers.
It was remarkable to me that when the NFL was doing their all 100 team, that he wasn't listed as one of like the top 12 quarterbacks ever.
Yeah.
Because he leads in every like statistical category.
And if these fluky games against the Vikings, for example, if either of them go, the right way, maybe he has 2 more Super Bowls or 1 more Super Bowl to add to his belt, and then maybe he's considered one of those top-tier quarterbacks. I think going into this year, this is their last chance. It
really is.
I think there's a chance that he plays 1 more year after this, but it is likely that he's probably going to be done. I think he signed a 2-year contract.
Yeah.
So it's possible that he plays 2 more years, but I think this is the shot this year.
If I'm not mistaken, the amount of cap space that they have for next year is quite literally like negative $25 million. And that's before the cap probably goes down a little bit
because
next
of COVID.
year. Yeah. Alvin Kamara is a free agent after this season. The year after that, Ryan Ramczyk, their right tackle, who is the best right tackle in the league, hands down, and Marshawn Lattimore are free agents. And all this is going on, you're paying Taysom Hill $21 million next year.
Oh, God.
I think he's making $5 million this year and $21 million next year, which doesn't make sense because he's a gadget player.
Taysom Hill, why would you pay him that much money? Even, especially because you know that, at least I hope you know that he's not your quarterback of the future.
Oh, I would hope they would know that, but I don't think they do.
Also, he's like 31 years old almost.
You want to know what Taysom Hill's career passing numbers are?
Oh, I'd love to.
Because people talk about, like, yeah, he's going to be their quarterback after Drew Brees, which doesn't make sense because I don't think they would have signed Jameis Winston if they thought Taysom Hill was a quarterback. Taysom Hill in his career as a passer, 6 completions, 13 attempts, 119 yards, 1 interception.
So, those 6 for 13, you said?
6 for 13.
Okay, yeah.
No touchdowns, 1 interception. He did have 6 receiving touchdowns last year.
So, yeah, the 6 for 13, it's a little below where I want my completion percentage for an NFL quarterback.
Just a little lower than I would like.
The touchdown to interception ratio is a little bit concerning. And
yeah, it's 0 to 1.
Hit fewer yards than I'd like in my franchise quarterback, but...
I mean, but the good news is he's only 32.
Yeah.
So maybe he can develop.
Yikes.
Look, Taysom Hill is a really good player to have on your roster if you're paying him like $2 million a year. Even up to like $5 million, because there's a lot of different things you can do with him. He's not worth $21 million.
You're right.
$16 million, however much they're paying him.
Yeah, he genuinely does change the offense right now in like the version of Taysom Hill that we're getting. Like, he comes out onto the field and then you have to think about it. It's just an extra thing that your linebackers have to check before the play, and then you have to watch him. And then if you're keeping your eyes on Taysom Hill, who's lined up at tight end or something, that's just one extra thing that you have to think about, and that gives Kamara the option to run a wheel route the other direction, Drees to throw a check down somewhere else. It just gives you more options. So it is like he's a valuable member of their offense, but for that much, are you kidding me? So yeah, I mean they're kind of in a bad cap space situation going forward, and Drew Brees is only getting older. He's only going to play a maximum of 2 more years, this year and the next year. I don't see him signing another contract beyond that.
Yeah.
So
they have a legitimate chance to win the Super Bowl this year, and it very well might be their last.
Yeah, and it's going to be tough because, I mean, you got a bunch of really good teams that are going to be vying for that NFC Championship.
Mm-hmm. One of those teams, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
Very possibly, yeah. And let's talk about them because they were 7-9 last year, like you mentioned, with a quarterback who threw, I count them, 30 and 30.
30 for 30, the Jameis Winston story.
I'm a little bit, before we talk about their potential, I want to say I'm a little bit sad that they're going to be a good team this year because there was nothing more fun. Even when the Niners were winning, there was nothing more fun than rooting for Jameis Winston to throw another interception, to get closer to 30 interceptions. That was the thing that I was looking forward to the most. There's record-breaking seasons all the time where you're like, oh, is Drew Brees going to break the touchdown record? Is Tom Brady going to do the Peyton Manning? Oh my! No, none of those were as exciting as watching Jameis Winston inch closer and closer to 30 interceptions. And when he does, oh my goodness, it was the most I've laughed in an NFL game in quite some time because you knew it was happening. You knew it was going to happen.
We might have to do a whole Jameis Winston pod one day, but I will say what I've always said is Jameis Winston is the best NFL quarterback that you definitely don't want on your team.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way of putting it. And now he's not on the Bucs, and you get Tom Brady, which is just a silly upgrade. You're now all of a sudden, just with the addition of Brady, potentially one of the most dynamic offenses in the NFL, because you already were with Jameis Winston, and he's he needed LASIK eye surgery. But with Tom Brady now, I mean, last year when we were watching Tom Brady, I don't know about you, but I was watching him and I was thinking, it's not his best. He looks fine, but he doesn't look like, a top 5 quarterback right now. Even if he plays just at that level, with the weapons that he has, and with Bruce Arians and the whole scheme and everything, the run game that they have, it's going to be tough to say that he won't have a great season and that the Bucs won't have a great season.
Yeah.
Injuries is the only thing I'm concerned about.
Injuries would be somewhat of a concern, just because also largely in part because he's old now. I'm kind of buying that Gronk's going to be back. Not necessarily to like peak Gronk level, but to, top 8 tight end level production.
Yeah.
They probably have the best wide receiver duo besides Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I think the sky's the limit for this offense here. Leonard Fournette was a sneaky move because although Leonard Fournette has not had the best year or best career so far, he was widely regarded as one of the best running backs in a long time when he was coming out in the draft. He's a very talented guy. Was part of his struggles because he was playing on Jacksonville, which is a bad team, and part B, his quarterback for a long time was Blake Bortles, who could not throw the ball.
Yeah, I think that they have all these, and the reason I posed the question earlier about whether they could possibly run the risk of being an Eagles dream team is just because there was a lot of the same sort of things, as like just a big collection of all of these talents just coming together at once. Although, like you said, one of those talents was the backup quarterback, Vince Young.
Which was ridiculous.
Yeah.
We'll do a whole Eagles Dream Team podcast one time, too.
Oh, so exciting.
But that was, yeah.
But, yeah, I think there's a chance that Brady does have an underwhelming season and they still manage to be a successful team. There's a chance that, the thing for the Bucs is that they just have so many pieces that it's hard to think of them as completely underwhelming. They're not going under 9 wins. I don't think they're going over 12 wins though either. I think they're in that 9 to 12 range.
Yeah, their defense also is a lot better than people think it is. They were one of the best defenses against the run last year,
and that's with a quarterback turning it over as many times as he did.
Ridiculous amount of times. And I think they got better on defense too. 2 players in particular I want to highlight that they got: Antonio Winfield Jr., who is the son of former Minnesota Vikings corner Antonio Winfield.
Legend.
They got him in the draft this year. I think he is absolutely terrific. And then they have an undrafted free agent who is going to be maybe their 4th-string corner this year, but I think could work his way up. Parnell Montley from Oklahoma, who was someone who I wanted the Niners to draft at around round 4 or 5, because I think he is absolutely terrific. He was maybe one of my top 10 corners in the draft this year, and I have little to no idea how he went undrafted.
Yeah. It's going to be a good year for the Bucs, for the Saints, for the whole NFC South. So that's our last division. Do you have any final thoughts before we finish this pod up?
It's a very interesting year in the NFL. I think when we take into consideration how this whole offseason and preseason cycle worked out, I think the big key is going to be teams who have a continuity. Teams who are returning the same quarterback, coach, OC combo as they had in previous years, because it's tough to learn the system without OTAs, without full offseason, without preseason games, which I know are often regarded as meaningless, but it does give you a chance to actually run your offense, run your schemes with full tackling to the ground, because a lot of teams don't do that during their own training camps. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out and affects this NFL season.
I'm also interested, obviously, in the whole COVID aspect of it, how that affects teams. But I think the teams that, like you said, maintain continuity, and the teams that are smart with COVID are going to be in a good position. And that's why the Niners are going to go 16-0 and win the Super Bowl. So.
I certainly hope so. I cannot give a Super Bowl pick because it would be widely regarded as a homer pick because I would pick the 49ers. But I don't know how much of that is my logic and how much of that is my just insane amount of love for this team. I cried a little bit when they made the Super Bowl last year.
And when they lost the Super Bowl.
And when they lost, I was just very sad.
Last quick question before we go. AFC and NFC championship game. Who do you think is most likely to get there?
I think in the AFC, I think the Ravens and the Chiefs are very clearly the two best teams.
I agree.
In that division. In the NFC, the 49ers. Then it's one of those NFC South teams.
I'm saying Saints.
I'm gonna say the Bucks because I like the narrative of the Padawan going up against the Master.
Yeah, we got a lot of fun stuff coming this year.
I'm looking forward to making and eating some chicken wings this Sunday.
Oh my God, I'm big on chips and salsa also.
Oh man,
salsa and guac and
yeah. There's a couple times a year that I go all out for football games because it is every week. Normally it's week 1 and then playoff games. You got to have a spread for the playoff games.
Yeah. And we also just have less things to be excited about right now because of COVID. So this is providing us so much more than it could ever know.
Yeah. All right. That about does it for us here. Thanks for listening. Have a good one.